Welcome back to another episode of Raising the Bar, TKJE podcast. Today we hear from Steve Farmer, co-owner of Legacy Acres Market and ambassador of the cannabis industry. Steve is originally from West Virginia and moved to New Mexico from Texas in 2021. He purchased his business in 2023 and is dedicated to promoting community development through collaborative sustainability in the cannabis industry. His main focus is on educating people about cannabis, the effect on our bodies, and fostering healthy communities. He believes healthy people are the foundation of a healthy community. Plan your steps and take flight. Raising the Bar, TKJE. Welcome back to another episode of Raising the Bar, TKJE podcast. Man, another one. I'm excited, you guys. Today we hear from Steve Farmer, owner of Legacy Acres Market and ambassador of the cannabis industry. We know this is, it's a hot topic. It's something that's been coming up. It's been happening. And we've got one of the best to talk to us about it, what's going to be happening within our state, the expansion. And I'm just happy and excited to have him here. So, Steve, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really good today for a Sunday.
Fantastic.
I consider Sunday the start of my week. So we're starting off well. Ken, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate you. All right. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's really get into this so our listeners can gather as much information as they possibly can. Now, when I met you, we had a brief conversation. You mentioned that you were from another state. You moved to New Mexico. So let's just start there, man. As far as your history, coming from Texas, I believe it is, give us a little bit about your history and what brought you to New Mexico.
As far as background, I was in healthcare in a couple of different capacities, both at a clinical level for a short period of time, but then at a longer period of time on the business side of healthcare, and specifically in sales and marketing for healthcare equipment providers, and then later into various capacities there that included design and construction. But that was a career and a passion at the time. But I was able to retire early out of that. I say early because we all like to think we're younger than we are. But I felt myself with an opportunity to continue working outside of what I'd call a career in healthcare. So I looked for opportunities and I followed a passion. A passion was through the discovery of a number of things about cannabis, not just the application of the plant on our bodies, but what it could do from, the standpoint of industrial application. And then from there, just started looking at the industry. And the industry is something that's, we'll call it growing leaps and bounds. But I think, Ken, as we both live in New Mexico, we can understand that it's had a huge impact over the last couple of years on everything from revenue to social changes. And so then that's what drew me. I came over 2.5 years ago. So what drew me at that time was what was very predictable would happen. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, and that there have been some pretty exciting, changes within the state, both at a commerce level and at a, as I've said, at a social level. So that's what drew me. The ability to participate in an emerging market, being nearby, having a connection to the plant, and finding that Eastern New Mexico, if you took all of, any research to tell you what market would develop, it was pretty easy to identify, a border town or border area, border being a state recently enacting legalization for recreational access in the state of New Mexico, bordering Texas, where you don't have legal recreational access to cannabis. So it became part following the passion, letting the passion drive me toward the commercial side of it, researching that a lot more, and making the decision to move to Eastern New Mexico. It's a lot more to it than that, but that's the short version.
As far as the growth, the development, expansion of the industry and where it's going, right? As you mentioned, now the legalization of it, there are some do's and don'ts. Some call them watch out fors within the industry. So as far as the do's and don'ts, what are some of those things that people may need to watch out for? And really, where do you see the feds going with the flower and the industry, kind of the effects and timing of all that?
I'll tie it back into what we were talking about a couple moments ago and just expand on having like the draw of the industry, the new industry. The one thing I found when really looking at cannabis as a at a level where it was, not just what it was going to become, but what it was lacking. We found that it was lacking an awareness of what it could do, not just as consumers. It's important to understand cannabis is a medicine. It can become a drug in I guess the sense of the word, that could lead to abuse, misuse. At its core, it has an effect on us physiologically. So there needs to be an awareness at a consumer level. And we find that most people that are in the cannabis space typically start out as consumers. And as such, we start out undereducated. So when you then just kind of keep extrapolating that to say, okay, well, the industry is going to grow by leaps and bounds. That's predictable. But one element that wasn't growing and still has, in my mind, the lesser focus than it should have, and that's education, driving an awareness of what this plant can do for us individually, but by extension of that, what it can do to, areas that it becomes available in, and an economy, is created out of the, passage of, cannabis access laws. So I guess what I would say as a watch out is viewing the industry or participating in the industry at all levels, be it as a consumer, a stakeholder trying to get into the industry, doing that without the proper amount of awareness or education to understand more about literally the plant from the ground up and understand, all of the tertiary levels that it's involved. Tertiary being that there's an element of how does it affect our bodies, and then there's an element, how does it affect our communities, how does it affect social equity, how does it affect economic opportunities. And so if we pull back into that and we start out unaware and undereducated about any of the aspects of the plant, we'll never understand enough about the industry. So that's my biggest watch out, is just awareness and education. And I will tell you, when I drill down to my journey, it was not just to come out to Tucumcari and buy a business that was part of that developing or predictable cannabis ecosystem, but it was to come out with a purpose of defining what educational needs were there and then capitalizing on that. So there is a commerce in education. It just doesn't seem handy to think about it, but it's only because it's not there yet. The more we learn about this plant, the better we will be as consumers and as stakeholders and better as an industry. And then that will probably coincide, quite honestly, Ken, with the federal government finally doing something with this plant. If you want to just give me some latitude, I'll nerd out on you for a second and just give you an update. As anybody that wants to do just some Google research can find out pretty readily that, in a nutshell, federal legalization is on its way. But I hate using that kind of terminology because it makes it seem like there's a key in a lock that says it's locked right now, so federally cannabis is illegal. And then it's just a matter of Big Brother at a high level, one person or a governing body just turning the key in the lock 90 degrees, and now it's federally legal. And as you can imagine, it just at the surface, it's more complex than that. It's a governmental function, but the dynamics of what it will take to do, in effect, something like that are kind of step by step, and they're chronologically occurring now. By that, I mean that there's a banking act. It's actually an acronym, SAFER, SAFER, SAFER Banking Act, and it will allow for cannabis to be supported by FDIC and federal backing of the banking industry. That's a really bad way of explaining that. Right now, cannabis cannot have a pathway for accessing funding through traditional banking because the traditional banking is backed by the FDIC, Federal Depository Insurance. Yeah, you get all that. So by being federally illegal, the banks can't be involved. Well, the Senate recently passed legislation passed out of committee a bill that will legalize or open the opportunity for FDIC money to be invested into the cannabis space. Simultaneous to that, Department of Health and Human Services this fall sent a letter at the request of the executive branch to reschedule cannabis from a Schedule I narcotic, which is on the same schedule as heroin and cocaine and fentanyl and things that we know have high addictive capabilities and really no medicinal values. That's obviously not the case with cannabis, and that's why it's being rescheduled. And the feds are moving slowly as the feds do. And I just want to quickly add, and I'm not being brief with any of this, but just to say that there are now 23 states that have legalized this on a state by state basis, and the feds are kind of late to the party. And I think they're probably going about this the right thing. That's just an IMHO, perspective for me. But they can't turn the key in the lock, and we have to make progressive steps that not only respect what this plant is all about, what it means to us individually and as a society, and we have to respect the fact that certain states have done the right things at their level. So it's a big thing. It's a big ship to turn around in a little harbor.
Some of the numbers, you and I spoke before, you had mentioned some of the numbers, the value of the industry itself when it comes to revenues, things of that nature. What are some of those numbers when it comes to the actual value or even future projected value numbers? What do those look like?
Well, it's a lot to get your arms around, and let's look at historicals, because I think everything's personal when it's local, right? So let's look at what numbers have meant at a perspective I think we can relate to in New Mexico. The first year projections from a revenue standpoint in New Mexico was $300 million in new cannabis sales the first year, and so the state exceeded that, as every other state had previous to that. And so we came out of the gate strong with close to $400 million, and we're well over $500 million to date historical numbers over the last 18 months or so. That's a lot of money. And then you look at tax revenue off of that, and that's money being reinvested back into the state. So you have a lot of business developments, a lot of corollary businesses that also collect taxes and have revenue and job growth opportunities abounding, right? Now, if you ramp that up, you'll end up with numbers that are just staggering. Like, there's a projection that I think is undervalued in terms of its forecast, but the cannabis market in the U.S. alone is scheduled to exceed $100 billion in this decade. Now, I think will elapse that earlier. And when I use numbers like this, it kind of they get lost on me, not only people I'm trying to share them with. So I'd like to give reference points. So when I say $100 billion, to put that in perspective, we all know Walmart, the world's largest employer, they have a market capitalization right now of about $400 billion. So when you're talking about an industry growing to that type of stratosphere, that's where cannabis is heading. Now, there's a poor reference in all other aspects to Walmart from an industry perspective, but I just wanted to give, from a valuation standpoint, just understand the nature of what we're dealing with. So the economic impact is felt locally in our hometowns, within our state, and now within the country, and it's just really getting started.
The licenses, when it comes to getting the license and the process, but why do some get licenses, some people don't? You yourself, can you give us an idea as a cannabis entrepreneur when it comes to growing, whether it be wholesale, retail? Give us an idea of how that lays out when it comes to getting a license within the cannabis industry.
Personal choice, right? I mean, you can choose to do that or not. Most people follow either their passion or their brain, to say, I want to get in cannabis. I have a story I want to share with others. I want to help others. Others view it as the green rush. And some people, the green rush being an economic windfall if you pull it off right in an emerging market such as this. And then a lot of people are blessed with, a combination of those two things. And I think it comes down to personal choice. So I think it comes down to making decisions on several fronts. In my case, I chose not to get licensed. When I moved to Texas, or moved from Texas to Tucumcari 2+ years ago, it was with the intent of participating in the industry. But it was a year ahead of legalization. So my work was to take all of the research that I'd done and making a decision that I'd made to be more consultative and literally become a cannabis consultant in going to Eastern New Mexico from Texas. And that's essentially what I did. I went through a process where you're asking me this question, and I would ask people that were paying me money to help get them in the industry. My interviews with them were along those lines. And it was asking people, why do you want to be in this industry? And in a couple of cases, it actually changed people's trajectory. And yet, I think you'll follow your way if you want to get a license and participate in a very crowded industry. And then you'll know that there's risks associated with that. And does your passion, is it larger than your business plan, or is it more, are you following one more than the other? And so to people that are looking at the cannabis ecosystem, because it increases revenue at all points. It's not just cannabis revenue that we're talking about. The collateral impact of this is that other businesses need expansion. Hospitality industry. I look at Tucumcari, and we've seen a tremendous increase in our gross revenue taxes over the last year and a half, and that's been across the board. So motel stays are up, restaurant stays are up, fuel stops are up. So that's participating in a cannabis ecosystem at a component level as surely as having a license and opening a dispensary or having a license and growing the plant. What I would encourage anyone to do if they're looking at this industry and do I get a license? Do I go follow my passion and my business plan and my intelligence? We all need to do a reset, even those that have our core competencies within this industry, that we know a little bit more about the plant. We know a little bit more about the commercial side and a lot of the aspects in between. We all need a hard reset to look for a second at what we don't know. And the more educated someone becomes on anything, I think the more successful they're going to be ultimately. But I think in this industry, we just have known too little for too long. And that lack of education and awareness has been the biggest bottleneck at an individual level, from the standpoint of, participating in things that can help you physically and emotionally, can better you physiologically. And then our lack of education and awareness when we decide to get into this business doesn't allow us to, in many cases, to make good decisions. I don't know enough, but I'm going to go ahead and make a decision to get licensed, or I'm going to go ahead and make a decision to expand my operation because the cannabis ecosystem is coming to my area. So that's a long-winded way of circling it back to education, but it literally does, at the heart of all that we do right now, the biggest push in the industry that I have and others that I'm proud to be associated with right now is awareness, delivering a message of education and how you get into this industry by being smarter about it and your entry being less likely to fail.
As far as your entry and where you are now, what you've grown from, as far as the business that you have now, and it's a market, what got you into, the food access business?
I'm really glad you asked that, because as I talk to people, just casual conversations, people find out obviously my cannabis passion and my history there, but then they assume I'm either, educating people or participating in a really competitive industry. And I'm not. When I came out to Tucumcari, and I helped a lot of people get into the cannabis space in a literal way through licensing and being an advocate in that area at a time when cannabis was going legal and there was, not a lot of awareness as what that was going to mean. It became apparent to me that I wanted to do something that I knew I was going to do when I came out there, and that was grow a segment within that cannabis ecosystem that is not only projected to be one of the fastest growing segments in a cannabis ecosystem, but in a food desert such as eastern New Mexico and as it's Tucumcari, food access became more important than anything else to me. So there was an opportunity to make money on it because it's going to grow at an exponential rate. It's going to be a buoy that floats with the boat when the cannabis ecosystem drives up, revenue points and improves socioeconomic standards. Eastern New Mexico is not blessed with a lot of food access to begin with. In Tucumcari, there's one major grocery chain, and then I'm the second grocery store, and I'm not a close second. We have a fresh farm to table market, which means we do a really good turn of business off of our farm that's part of our store. We have a 2-acre farm separate from the store, but we also have greenhouse space on our property. So we're our own producer. So we do, in the cannabis industry, they call it seed to sale. And in the food access industry, we also call it seed to sale.
Wow.
So we grow a lot of our own fruits and vegetables. We display those in the shop, and we have a healthy turn business of ironically healthy fruits and vegetables. And we have meat suppliers. So we get, local access proteins. So we provide a service, and we do provide, grocery access all year round. simply have to get the same sourcing through food distribution in the off season when we're not growing or accessing through other producers in the area or our local cooperative. So
Wow.
what made me get into that, want to become a vital part of food access, was because I think it's the thing that should be done. There's a lot of social equity that we promote and we accomplish through the legalization of cannabis in all these states. Baked into most of those laws is like an even starting point for people wanting to get into the industry, at least initially in most of the state laws as they're written. But we need to take that a step further. And if you know the predictability of this market state by state, and I said earlier, I feel like I can read history pretty well and know what's going to happen. And we know that food access is going to be a good business because people, it's the number one thing they'll need to survive. Cannabis will help promote that, from a local economic development perspective, but it's also needed. And you have to feed people. And when you have the kind of socioeconomic numbers that we have in eastern New Mexico, how can you know as much as you know about what's going to happen and not service the number one critical need that's going to still be apparent, even though all this other socioeconomic development's going on around it? So there's an altruistic part to that, but there's a business part to it. And if it's done right and you have a vibrant local agricultural cooperative, you can do a lot of things off of that make it a really good business and feeds hungry people.
As far as advice, you've got people that want to get into this industry. What advice would you give others trying to break into the industry right now?
So research, and it won't be easy because this, cannabis is fraught with stigmas that we're breaking daily by having people understand more about what this plant does for us and not to us. The opportunities will be there. When I say research, I say it's become better aware, become better educated. And then that's going to leave people hanging because where do you go for that? And where you go for that is you network. You find places that you can ask those questions. There are educational programs developing on literally a daily and weekly basis. And there's some that I'm personally connected to, and I feel strongly about their ability to drive change in this industry through education. I would, at a starting point for your listeners, just have them stay connected through me. And I post a lot of stuff that will lead people to quantifiable educational programming that'll make you smarter quicker instead of going about it through the way that we've had to date. And that was just doing, basic research and deep dive and a lot of experimenting with cannabis to understand what works for, each of us. Education, I center it back. It seems like I've answered about 4 of your questions with just that statement. I don't mean to be at a loss for other things to look at with it in each one of those answers, but it really does come back to that. I can't overstate the importance of being smarter and being more prepared and having, formalized educational programs available to it.
When we did meet, you mentioned this huge tour. So your involvement in a national event, I believe it's the Thunder Walker Smoke Currency Tour. Give us a little bit about the who, the what, the where, the when, the why. What inspired this major tour that you're on, and where's it going, and how does it all end?
So great. So the who is Thunder Walker. So let me just back up and say quickly that the cannabis industry is still a fairly, not such a small community anymore, but we network well. So people start to get connected. And I was fortunate enough being in this industry. I knew Thunder Walker, and through people that I knew that she knew, we became aware of each other's location and then history and then journeys that we were underway in some of our goals and objectives. And we found that there was a lot of overlap. Thunder has an incredible presence at a national level. She's very prominent within the industry as a spokesperson, but not without having some skin on the wall. She's one of the most successful cannabis entrepreneurs in the industry, and she is in a component of it within real estate that she's had tremendous success. Prior to her involvement in the cannabis space, she was an appraiser and had a very successful real estate enterprise. And so now she helps others within that particular aspect of the industry. And she further helps people at all levels to get into the industry through everything we talked about, an awareness through education. And she's taken that now to a point where we want to put it on the road. We need to go state by state because the disparity between states and how the cannabis industries, perform and what they're capable of is largely myopic. It's kind of isolated state by state. So Thunder wanted to take that message that she has a lot of, national prominence with delivering and helping people understand more about this industry and even participate in it. We wanted to take that on the road and go state by state and find out what was unique in each of those states and find out what was, what we were capable of taking from a previous state and sharing with another state. And in doing those individual states, talking to everyone from legislators, policymakers, people that were at a local stakeholder level, educating consumers, helping people getting into the industry, women, minorities, people that would have a challenge otherwise participating in this industry. And so this tour is coming to New Mexico. I would encourage people to reach out through me, Ken. Actually, I don't think I'll get too overwhelmed with a lot of requests for this that I can't manage, but I would like to be a conduit to share with people. I think in New Mexico, it's more our opportunity to understand. I equate it to just like taking a turbo boost in our awareness and our ability to understand this industry at a holistic level, a global level. Like this is the nation of cannabis coming to our state as it's going state by state already. We've concluded 2 states now, and New Mexico is coming up on December 9th through the 13th. So I'd like to make everyone aware of those dates. And again, I'd like to, Ken, at some point, I guess I will give you information to share with your listeners and then use me as a conduit for people that have an interest. And I'd like to encourage people to take a look at the Smoke Currency Tour and take a little deeper dive into Thunder Walker and her message. And through me, you'll have an opportunity to see this tour when it comes to the state, and you'll have an opportunity to participate in it. Everything from sponsorship through our partnering with local businesses to people coming on in the role of individual participants riding along. This tour bus will be in the state for 4 days. It enters into New Mexico from Texas through Tucumcari. We'll have stops in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and it'll make a round trip again as it exits out through Tucumcari and back into Texas. And it's a lot to tell you about, and I felt like I may have butchered some of the logistics and particulars on it, but I hope I've scratched the surface with some interest in it. And I would only encourage people to take more interest. This is a rare opportunity, just the timing of it. Our recent legalization and a lot of those numbers that we talked about, those revenue numbers and that socioeconomic impact, it's really just getting started. And the evolution of us understanding it and getting our arms around it is just whatever it's going to be over time. But this, again, is a turbo boost of understanding a lot more in a condensed way. And this is going to be a fun experience. Thunder is a very dynamic, very entertaining presence. She's incredibly intelligent. She's been hugely successful. And this tour is going to be not just enjoyable, also informative. And I think when it leaves the state, we'll say essential because it's necessary to go back to that educational component. The more we know, the better off we are to understand and participate at all levels.
Now let's look at as far as advice. I know you've been through a lot, and then you're currently in business, and you're developing, growing, and you're helping others. Can you give our listeners one piece of business advice on your business, the industry, that has stuck with you on your journey before we let you go?
I'm not smart enough to have advice that people can take and apply, but I will tell you one thing I've learned a very, very hard lesson on. I wish I hadn't wasted 90% of my career life figuring this out. It is a lot harder to compete in the space of the known being the space that everybody else knows about and they're participating in. That's the known space. It's a known commodity. I'm choosing to go over there and participate where other people are because I think I'm smarter, better, or I'm better located. You can do that. A lot of successful people have done that. And yet I found that without looking at the unknown, and how do you look at something that's unknown, right? Why not look at something you're less familiar with? In the case of cannabis, I'll cite that everything I researched was what I found, and what I found lacking was what I couldn't find. I draw inspiration from learning more about what I don't know And I've become fearful of what I do know, because what I do know is pretty much what everybody else knows. They have access to things. It's just I haven't found them if I don't know it, or they haven't found it if I know it and they don't. My words of encouragement is seek the unknown. And maybe that's just a little deeper dive into the known, because inside all of everything we know is some portion of what we don't know. Maybe not across the board, but at an individual level. Explore what you don't know, and don't just take for granted that you have to participate in the same thing everybody else does. There might be something missing that you're going to be the one that discovers.
Wow, that is really, really awesome. Steve, thank you so much again for being here. You dropped a lot of gems during this interview. When it comes to finding you, getting a hold of you, you mentioned that a few times. How can people get a hold of you so they can ask questions and really dive into your knowledge base?
So the best way is probably on social media. You can find me on Instagram, steve.ganjawellness. I have my email address is ganjawellness@gmail.com. And if you reach out to me, I promise you it won't go unnoticed and it won't go unresponded to. And I would double back on my offer to have people reach out to me, particularly about this tour. I think this is going to be a phenomenal opportunity for our state to gain some national recognition on something we've done really well, which is open up the cannabis industry in a way that we're going to show them that we have some practical application of what's being, shown at a national level. So through those two ways, ganjawellness@gmail.com, and that's Steve Farmer, or hit me at steve.ganjawellness on Instagram.
Again, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And listeners, I know you got some gems out of this. So Steve, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and much success to you, to the tour, and we will talk with you later.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for what you do.